Hello and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy. Today we're talking to Emily Rubin Persons. She is a certified ADHD coach who works with both students and adults. She helps her clients build their executive skills and do things in a way that works for their brains so they can be their best in school, work, and social life. Welcome, Emily.
I am so delighted to be here.
So let's talk. We like to kind of define the issue at the beginning of the podcast. So let's talk about college readiness and the idea of that. Amy has kids who are in college, heading to college. I have middle schoolers still. But I think actually college readiness kind of happens at every age and stage. So talk a little bit about the idea of college readiness and what kind of work you do around it.
It's a big topic and
Yes.
it's quite broad because what does a student need to be a successful college student? A lot of those skills start developing very early. There's a level of independence and confidence to do the work that they need to do. You know, high school is 80-20, 80%. So think about 80-20 versus 20-80.
Mhm.
80% of the learning happens in the classroom. 20% of the learning happens at home.
Mm.
In college, 20% is in the classroom, 80% is at home. So that's important because in elementary, middle, high school, there's a lot of reminders, there's a lot of supports. In middle school and high school, the bell rings telling the student that it's time to move to the next classroom. They're pretty much in school from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock, either by bus or somebody dropping them off. After school activity. So the day is extremely structured and the kid doesn't really have to think too much about what's coming next. They have only an hour or two at night. That's when they're going to get their homework done and then repeat the next day.
And when they're home getting their homework done, I know in my case, there's a parent generally standing over them and saying, what 3 things do you have to do? Let's start one before let's start one before dinner. Then let's move to those other 2 after dinner. So even that has a lot of structure. I mean, I'm sure I have, 3 kids and some kind of go off and do it on their own, but there's still a lot of structure at home.
There's a lot of structure and parents usually have the parent portal of some nature.
Oh, yes. We have definitely discussed the parent portal.
The parent portal. So you know exactly what's going on. So that's another thing because in college, parents don't have access to their students' portal. You get access to their financial bills and that's pretty much it.
Let me speak from experience. My several times I have 2 college students, and there are sometimes things you need to do, such as make sure you have to check a box saying you don't want the college healthcare plan.
Right.
And if you don't say you don't, they'll charge you $4,000.
Right.
However, the repeated notices about that only go to your kid's
That's right.
email address.
That's right.
And then I'm like, you need to forward me that email. And then you need to be there when the 2-factor authentication goes to their email, or else you're paying $4,000 for healthcare. I think they overcorrect. It's ridiculous. It's like, if you don't tell us you don't want to spend $4,000, your parents $4,000. It's a little preposterous that only goes to the kid, but that's how it is. And
that's how it is.
Some of that's unavoidable. There's some open manholes in your path, no matter what. I think
And that's exactly right.
Happens.
And many kids, we make all the decisions. The parents typically make all the decisions from the time our kids are born until they're in their 30s. So, how do you help your kid start to develop those adulting skills? And, I love a lot of metaphors. I mean, think about, what's the long-term goal? You want your kid to be able to drive. It is a beautiful thing when your teen all of a sudden is able to drive and they can drive themselves to those activities and you don't have to do that anymore. Well, you don't just learn to drive by looking at a book and winging it. You have a lot of practice. There's a lot of practice. Well, adulting requires a lot of practice. And when we are constantly helping our teens, helping our tweens, manage their school portal, talking to the teachers for our teens, not going to a 504 IEP meeting if your kid has a diagnosis of some kind. If we're doing all that for them, they're not building those decision-making skills. It takes a lot to learn to drive, red lights, people crossing streets, somebody's not using their blinker. And there's a lot of practice involved in that I have 3 kids who now drive and, a lot of white knuckles for a while. Well, it's the same thing. If you're going to send your kid off to any type of school after high school, would you put that $20,000 to $80,000 investment on someone who hasn't practiced those skills?
And a lot of those skills come down to a term that we use a lot on the podcast, which is executive functioning.
Yes.
So let's imagine someone's hearing that term for the first time. And this is a term, obviously, you work in ADHD, kids on the spectrum. Certain kids struggle more with executive function, but all kids need to have executive function to
Exactly.
get through the day and eventually fly the nest. So tell us what executive functioning skills are.
So there's a number of them, and a lot of experts, you could see sometimes the list is as small as 6, and sometimes it's as many as 12. But, working memory, you have to be able to remember the things you need to remember. Planning, that's a big one. How you plan and prioritize. When you have, and I just was with a client yesterday, she gets overwhelmed by the amount of things that she needs to get done in a day, and often will just not do anything. Because
I am that client. I mean, I'm not your client, but I definitely have had that experience. I often say to my husband, I'm just sitting really still because I have too much to do.
I have too much to do and I don't know what to do first. And, that's a really big skill. And for, just to interject for a parent, if they're thinking, well, how can I help my kid do that? Think about how you run your Saturdays when you've got a long list of errands to run. Talk that out loud like you used to do when your kid was 2. First, we're going to do this and then we're going to do that. Because that shows them how you're thinking and how you're planning through the prioritizing of things. And often you look at the calendar, what's the due date? The executive skills of time management. Time management is confusing because sometimes a person's management of time is impacted by their lack of organization. If you are not very organized and you're constantly looking for your things, you're going to run late. Can't find my shoes. I can't find my keys. I can't find my homework. I forgot what the directions were. I didn't write them down in the right place. You're
I don't have
disorganized.
the invitation, right? I don't know where the party is because I don't know where I put that.
So your time management can be impacted by your lack of organization skills. Emotional regulation is a big one. When you make a mistake, when a person makes a mistake and they get flooded with emotions, the amygdala kicks in and the executive skills stop. You're upset. You raised your hand in class and you answered incorrectly. Now you're embarrassed. So your executive skills kind of shut down. You're in this fight, flight, and freeze mode. So being able to control your emotions. And as a college student, you're in a new environment. There's a lot of stress and anxiety of making a new friend. I just read something the other day with some of the skills that a student needs in college, small talk. We've got kids who only talk via text, but when you're in a college classroom, and I just had this meeting with a different student yesterday, who do you know in class that you could study with? Because a lot of students like to study with a buddy. And so you need to be able to have a little skill of small talk so that you could reach out to a classmate and say, hey, what did you think about
together?
that?
Yeah.
Let's do this together.
Yeah. Can I ask a clarifying question about executive function? So executive function is something in kids with ADHD, it is something they struggle with more, these areas of executive function. Are these, and then some kids don't struggle that much with this. They seem more able to organize and plan ahead. Is this something that every brain has to learn and ADHD kids are behind or, really need scaffolding this way? Or is this something that some kids are born with it and some kids might never learn it without the coaching?
The operative word is skills, executive functioning skills.
Okay.
When our kids are in 7th grade or 6th grade, I forget exactly what year it is, they receive a planner. Who's an expert at using a planner when they're 12?
Right.
They're developing those skills. So even your most neurotypical, on the ball kid has to learn some method of keeping track of what they need to do and when they're going to do it. Some kids do it faster than others. Typically, the ADHD kid is about 30% delay in their executive skill development, but as is it someone with dyscalculia or dysgraphia or trauma, kids who have dealt with trauma or anxiety, all of these things impact your executive functioning skills. And, no two kids are the same, regardless of whether they have a diagnosis or not. So, one kid might be extremely organized and neat and tidy, so they don't fit the profile. So even your most neurotypical might have weak executive skills in certain areas because they just simply haven't developed yet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
they
why
haven't had to, as you
or
said.
they haven't had to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, look, in my school district where my kids are, we used Schoology. Some used Blackboard or Canva or Canvas, I forget, or Google Classroom. And so in high school, so many of my clients would say, well, I don't need to write any of the homework down because it's already in the portal calendar. And so they didn't get the practice because the teachers all put it there. Well, in college, the teachers have their own system. You ever read a syllabus?
Right.
That is a major skill that students, I did a workshop last year for freshman students. How many read the syllabus more than once, more than twice, more than 3 times? There is so much information in there, and the teachers are constantly changing that information. So you can't rely on just what is in the school portal. You have to learn to write things down and create your own calendar worksheet. And no two people are the same. So the parent might say, well, this is the way you need to do it. That might not work for that kid. You've got to experiment. Some kids use lots of sticky notes. Some kids use their phone. Some kids use a whiteboard. Some kids use a wall calendar. So you just have to keep experimenting and, and that's part of what that middle school and high school is all about, is experimenting to find ways. And decision-making, okay, that didn't work. Let's pivot. Let's find something else, helping the kid learn to pivot. Okay, this one didn't work. That's okay. I use metaphors. So I also use the kitchen. You're learning how to cook. Learning how to cook a fried egg is a really good skill. And if you've ever cooked a fried egg, it's really in the timing. So if you don't do it well, you learn for the next time. And you learn for the next time and the next time. Little too much salt, too much pepper, let me make an adjustment. Well, it's the same thing with how you do your schoolwork, how you study, how you keep track of your things. It's all an experiment, and you keep figuring out and pivoting until you find a way that works for you.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about ages and stages and how we start working on these skills. We are talking to Emily Rubin Persons, and we'll be right back. So when you think about, I feel like we've had this conversation on the podcast that we maybe start panikedly thinking about this when our kids are 16.
Yeah.
And that in fact, these are the kind of skills. And, I feel like, and we've talked about this, there's a lot of dialogue around like, oh, just get out of the way, mom. You're hovering too much, mom. And it's all your problem. And now your kid's not ready for college. And it's like, but on the other hand, we were told like, hey, if they're not reading the portal and doing everything correct, like someone's going to write on the message board that you stink. So it's taking a step back from like, this is all because mom is doing too much and over supervising. But how do we get into, I guess, first of all, what are the signs that we're heading for to see college readiness in our kids? And then we'll take a step back and try to break down how we can work towards those skills at different ages and stages. So what are the signs that you look for in college readiness?
It's self-awareness. How aware is the student as to what their needs are and how they get their needs met? What even their needs, again, what their needs are. Some kids don't even know what their needs are. And that's the spectrum. I do a lot of coaching at an elite school in New York. Not all of them have ADHD. Some of them just have anxiety or just kind of weak skills. And, understanding what your needs are, how to tolerate boredom, how to tolerate the anxiety of going into a class and having to speak up in class. So, when our kids are really little, they're toddlers, and we don't walk for them. We give them that space so that they can learn to walk and run and play with blocks or Legos or whatever the games are. But then something happens. We're so, the world has become so much more competitive, and we want our kids to do well. Everyone gets a trophy, right? Nobody gets a C anymore. Like, it's not good to get a C. But, if you get a C in 7th grade on one test, it's not the end of the world, because again, that's information that you can take in and say, okay, what was your method of studying for that? And how can we pivot and make changes so that the next time maybe you'll get a B or an A? And a lot of my college students, they come to me because they have failed a class, and it's very, very devastating because they were A+ students in high school, but they don't know how to manage all of that. So I would say, starting in as early as possible, give some what questions to your kids. What do you think? Give them some space. How do you think you should do this? What help do you need from me? Gee, that sounds like a challenging situation. What are you going to do about it? And before you quickly jump in with an answer, give some space and trust them. Say, I trust that you can make a decision here. And that might be the 6th grader as to who they're going to sit next to at lunchtime, or the 10th grader, and they don't really understand what the directions are, and how are they going to go talk to the teacher about it?
Dr. Lisa D'Amour was on our podcast talking about teenagers and their issues, and how sometimes we mistake a bad day for a troubled teen, right?
Right.
And she said something that I think about all the time, which is when your kid is struggling with something and they're venting to you, as is their privilege and right to do so, that the thing to say in response is, well, wow, that sounds hard. Do you need help with this?
Exactly.
Do you need help figuring this out? And so I find myself saying that a lot. And the answer is usually no. And if the answer is yes, then you know that they do need help. But I've watched my kids kind of think about that and say, no, I guess I could call the teacher or email the teacher and ask for an extension and explain that it was because I had to be out of town. Like, okay, all right, well, let me know how that goes. And asking them if they need help rather than assuming they need help has really helped me with this part of it.
Exactly. You have to give them that space to learn to make that decision, to learn, when you go for a job interview, you've never been on a job interview before. You don't know what questions to ask. One of my kids went on his very first job interview and he got the job, but he came home and I said, so what are they going to pay you? He said, I don't know. I said, well, you didn't ask? He said, no. I mean, he had never been on a job. Like, how do you know what you're supposed to ask? That takes practice. And, so for a college student, they need to talk to their professors. It's really important to build that relationship with your professors. But if they've never really had to talk to their teachers in that way, sit down and have a conversation about a project or a test, that's the small talk. That's the practice of talking to a grown-up. And because our kids are so much on the phones, they've lost. I mean, in the olden days, right? If you wanted to reach a friend, you called them on the telephone, and often you'd get Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, and you had to talk to Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so for a moment and say, hi, Mr. So-and-so.
Yeah.
So, it's an ongoing process. And for folks, for parents, building that self-awareness and accepting as well, oh, you're terrible at memorizing things. Okay, let's figure out a way to get around that. And what's also challenging that I see is, first, if your kid has an allergy, a food allergy or diabetes, you tell your kid, they know how to deal with it. Well, there's a lot of kids with ADHD, dyslexia, whatever. And the parents, or even kids on the spectrum, and parents don't really give all of that information to their teen, to their kid. So, we're empowered when we have the information that belongs to us. If I have ADHD, I need to know so that I can understand. And, I met with a student yesterday for the first time, and she's newly diagnosed. And the frustration of all her years of struggling, of being told she was lazy. And now she's going to learn how her brain works. So the sooner you tell your kid it's not a bad thing if you have dyslexia. I mean, typically you have a higher IQ, but you want your kid to know so that they can learn how to build those skills around it, much the same as if you have a deformity in your hand or, some other kind of physical ailment, you need that information so that you can build the skills to be your best.
I think also having a kid who has support at school, that the supports have gotten so much better, which is wonderful. Like, certainly there were not these kind of supports when I was going through school. But as the child goes through school, as we start to think about college readiness, those supports have to pull back a little bit,
Hmm.
or you have to get your child involved in advocating for their own supports. And I think that can be a complicated process with a kid who needs a lot of support, because those supports are helping them function. But if those supports probably are not going to be exactly replicated at the college level,
Right.
they need to, you said in an article that you wrote, which I thought was really interesting, that college supports tend to be students have to actively seek out services. Schools will not chase children down to get the services,
That's
which
right.
is different than the high school model. In high school, if a child with supports doesn't show up somewhere, there's a counselor and a teacher and someone, and they're all going, "Where is he? Let's find him. Let's figure it out. Let's have a meeting. Let's call the parents."
Right.
But that seems like an enormous change for kids who have supports, who might just say, "Well, nobody's helping me, so I guess I'm on my own."
That is exactly right. To find the services, first of all, a lot of disability services departments within the university are very difficult to find on the website. You have to really be a website detective to locate them. Often it's best to just Google it or, put it in the search bar. A lot of schools provide all these amazing services for free to all students: academic coaching, EF skills, executive functioning coaching, tutoring, writing center, etc. Other schools, you have to apply. They want to see a recent neuropsych evaluation, and then they will decide if you are eligible. And there's high fees. Some schools charge as much as $3,000 or $4,000 for those extra services. But your kid, you're right. The kid is the one that has to manage all of that. And if they don't reach out, they just won't get those services. And that's
Even
really hard.
even when you qualify for those services, extra time in college, it is on the student
Yes.
to go to each professor. It's not like if your kid gets extra time in high school, then it's just no when it's time for a test. And sometimes they have to advocate, like, can I get my extra time at lunchtime or
Right.
whatever. But in college, that student has to go tell each of their teachers, they'll have at least 36 teachers, right, during that time, and explain to them, I qualify for this accommodation. And, how are you going to give it to me? You have to have that conversation over and over again.
Right.
For a
And that's
kid
a
that's
big
bad at
skill.
planning ahead, that's a hard, a hard bar to meet.
That's exactly right. And that's a very big skill to advocate for yourself. And if you as the parent have been doing all that work for your student in high school, and they have not been the one to reach out to the teacher and the counselor and the special ed counselor or whatever, that's again another skill. And one of my clients, they need to take tests in a different location. They have to apply for that testing, location over a week prior to the exam.
Mhm.
That's an executive skill.
So
Yes.
hard, yeah.
Planning, prioritizing, organization, time management to make sure that that need is met. And if they don't do it early enough, because the school has to make sure that there's an extra classroom
Mhm.
ready. Some kids need quiet, some, whatever. So the kid, again, there's the self-awareness, the self-acceptance that they accept this is what my needs are. And then the reliance on themselves that they can get their need met. When my oldest was in college, like the fourth day in, I get the phone call, right? We all get these phone calls. My laptop's not working.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm like 5 hours away. There's absolutely nothing I can do about it. So I said, well, I'm going to think that there's a tech department somewhere on campus. Maybe you could look into that. And that was the end of it.
Mm.
And, that's the kind of thing we're so quick we want our kids to do well. We want our kids to get straight A's, for fear that I don't know what would happen if they got a B. But they will be okay. But because of this heightened pressure in middle school and high school that all kids and the parents are giving tutors. I have one student who had tutors all through high school, just so that somebody was sitting with him while he did his homework.
Mm.
And when he got to school, and he was at a very competitive school, I remember him saying to me, I don't even know when I'm supposed to take a shower. Like, somebody had been telling him what to do. And he ended up doing fine. He kind of figured it all out. And we actually only had to work together for a few months. But you want your kids to sit in the driver's seat.
Mm.
And
I
the
think
sooner, yeah.
I think that story is important because I remember when I went to college, I had never done laundry. My mother was particular about how laundry was done. I'd never done it. I got to college and I remember my roommate being appalled that I was just shoving, a giant pile of everything in the same laundry. She's like, that's not how you do laundry. And very quickly, through basically peer pressure, I was like, okay, I've got to figure out how to do laundry.
Right.
There are things you can figure these things out, on the fly, and you can navigate this stuff. And moving from elementary school to middle school involves some of that. Middle school to high school involves some of that. But I think the key is yes, you're not going to prepare for everything, but starting those preparations. And one of the things you suggested was really interesting to me, and I think about it, and I think it would be effective for my kids, is starting to use peer-to-peer tutoring in high school and starting to figure out how to get help from peers at the middle and high school level. So talk a little bit about that, because that was kind of a light bulb thing for me, because I think it works on small talk, peer interaction,
Right.
advocating for yourself, and you're not just going to an authority figure who's going to kind of fix it for you.
Well, it kind of goes along the lines of that study buddy. A lot of people draw positive energy from another person, whether they're working together on the same subject or just sitting in the same room. Let's go to the library together. You're going to work on physics. I'm going to work on math. So just even sitting with the person can be helpful. But, in most high schools, I think it's a requirement of honor society students that they tutor other students. And, there's a lot of it for some students that have a diagnosis of some kind. They feel shame about that. And so they feel embarrassed to ask for help. Oh, I shouldn't want to ask for help. That makes me look deficient. And for the college students that I work with at some of these schools who don't have a diagnosis, they all use the services. Why wouldn't I use the Writing Center? It's there for me. But the ones that have a diagnosis feel shame. So the earlier we can, and that's why I think it's important for parents to help their kids understand there's no shame in anything. It is who you are. We all have something, and the sooner you understand, yeah, I actually need to sit with somebody while I do my schoolwork. Embrace that, normalize it, because the sooner you give them that small talk skill of asking a friend, hey, what was on that homework assignment again? I mean, we've all been there. It's like, I don't know what the homework is. I don't understand it. Well, could you talk to a classmate? No way. I'm not going to talk to a classmate. It's like, but why not? So if we, and the teachers, I think, could help on this too a little bit if they kind of normalize it in the classroom and maybe said, okay, how about there's 2 or 3 of you that just become your homework buddies. And if you don't understand something, you can reach out in this way. But, to help your kid realize it's not a negative to ask for help. It's actually a sign of maturity, because you're raising your hand and you're saying, you know what? I don't get it. Please explain it to me. And the older we get, the less afraid we are of that, because we know what happens if we don't ask, right? We are late on a bill, or, there's a lot of things that are confusing. So the more we help our kids realize asking for help is a sign of strength, because you're saying, I need help. So why wouldn't I ask for help?
We're talking to Emily Rubin Persons. I have a thought on college readiness that just came to me, and we'll talk about it after this. So, Emily, there's so much fear around your kid going away to college, or even away to sleepaway camp. My kids did that first, so I think about that. And you think, what am I not thinking of? What if this is the wrong kind of bug spray? What if I didn't send them with enough socks, right? And then what I learned when my kids went to sleepaway camp is maybe they didn't have enough socks, right? Maybe they had to wash their socks in the lake one day, whatever. That's why you go to camp. You go to camp to have these small things. There is no way to plan ahead for every bump your kid is going to hit once they get to school. One year, my kid went to sleepaway camp and his trunk didn't show up. And so for 3 days, he had to borrow clothes and depend on the kindness of strangers for like a blanket to sleep under, because it took a couple days for the camp to figure out that my kid hadn't gotten his trunk, because he just was going along with the flow.
Right.
Anyway, the lessons involved for that, I wish I could have made sure his camp trunk got there, but those lessons were fine. As you were saying, some kids fail a class in college, and it seems to me this work isn't about making sure your kid won't fail a class once they get to college, but making sure they have the resilience to call you or ask for the help they need or figure out what to do next when you get to college and you weren't ready for something.
Exactly. You know, the work very quickly piles up. Again, that 80-20 rule. 20% of work is done in the classroom in college, 80% on your own. And there's volumes of reading. One of my clients has like 30 articles, opinion articles to read every week. It's hundreds of pages in just one class. So if, economics, in economics, you can't not do the work because it builds on itself. And very quickly you're falling behind. And the mountain of overwhelm, it is just too much. And for some kids, they just stop because it's the mountain is too big. They just cannot climb that mountain, and they've never had to ask for help. So they don't know how to even do it. And that's tough. I mean, I think for parents, of course, we want our kids to, what's the goal? We want our kids to succeed. We want them to do well, but we want them to know that they matter for more than just the grades that they receive. So if your kid doesn't get an A, are they afraid to tell you? If your kid is starting to come up, fall underwater at school, are they afraid to tell you? You want them to come to you because we've all failed. We haven't gotten to this point without failing at things. Failing is part of learning. I failed a class in college. I'm here. It was my second business.
More than one. Here I am.
And and I say to my student clients, even my adult clients, you take that information and you use it, and that's how you move forward. So how do we help our kids build that resilience? You have to let them experiment. You have to let them know that you trust them. You have to give them opportunities to make mistakes so that they learn to use their critical thinking skills. It's not just about laundry. How about you give a short shopping list and send your kid to the grocery store and say, okay, go to the store and you're not allowed to text me 15 times. Just go and do your best and accept what they come back with. It doesn't matter if they, buy pasta instead of rice, or they don't know what the difference between pork and beef is or whatever. Just let them go and figure out how to make it happen. Because that's a life. Going to the grocery store is a giant skill. Skill.
This weekend at a restaurant that had like a bar. I don't want to say I was hanging out at a bar with my kids, but we were at a restaurant bar having a little event. And my daughter came up to me and said, will you go order me something from the bartender? And I said, no, you can, she's 12. I said, you can go up. She's like, no, I could never talk to a bartender. And I mean, not that I'm advocating for ordering drinks at a bar is a good life skill for a 12-year-old.
To bartenders.
But the idea of you are old enough to go figure this interaction out. You're allowed to be here. They have lemonade. You will ask the guy and he will give it to you. It's not that complicated. But my first instinct, of course, was to be like, okay, let me stop the conversation that I'm enjoying and go over and get this for you.
Right.
And I think we try to talk a lot on the podcast of like, it's not, oh, you're a horrible, snowplow parent, helicoptering everything. But a lot of times we just miss the easy opportunities to do this.
Margaret, you just hit such an important topic here. So you can help your kid develop their skills from the earliest of ages. When you go to the doctor and they're 5 years old, who tells the doctor how the kid is feeling? Okay? Let the kid talk. If they don't say everything completely, mom or parent or caregiver can fill in later, but let the kid tell the doctor how they're feeling, what hurts, what doesn't hurt, or whatever. When they go to the hairdresser, let the kid tell the hairdresser what they want. At the store, or like you said, at the restaurant, have your kid learn how to say, hello, Mr. Shopkeeper, can you tell me where the whatever is? Help them build those skills. And that starts as young as, as soon as you're in a store together, because you're right. I'm having a conversation. We're at grandma's house. You can ask Uncle Bob for a cup of soda or milk or whatever, so helping your kids from a very early age learn to get their needs met, not just through the parent, but on their own, and build that talking skill.
So it's like tolerating discomfort, small talk, and like doing that thing you don't really want to do, and adulting in these tiny ways. That's how you prepare somebody for college, not
exactly
make sure they have the right planner. Maybe also make sure they have the right planner. I sent my kid to school with a planner and it was not used. However, they did manage to do their homework somehow. It's all very invisible to you once they leave the house. If you've taught them to tolerate discomfort and to reach out for help, that's better than how to separate your darks from whites. You can figure that out on the fly.
Exactly. And that's kind of the concept of the snowplow parent or the lawnmower parent. We want to smooth everything so that life is easy for our kids, so that they're not stumbling, so that they're not feeling discomfort. But you need a little discomfort. Again, is your self-awareness. What is going to trigger me? None of us went out of the house without our diaper bag when our kids were infants. We had whatever it was our kid needed. Well, I said to some of my clients, even adults, what's in your diaper bag, right? We all have things we need with us at different times, whether we're 5 years old or, look at a kid's backpack. They've got all kinds of things on there that they need to make them feel comfortable with. It's fidget toys or little funny things. And even as adults, I'm sure you always have things with you. I always have a water bottle. It's like, no matter if I'm going 5 minutes out of my house, I always bring my water bottle. It's ridiculous. We weren't thirsty 30 years ago, but today we're very thirsty.
No, it's so weird.
Need that much water.
I can attest to that.
I want to go back. I think there's an interesting issue about reading in college. There was recently an article in The Atlantic that I'm sure you saw called "The Elite College Students Who Can't Read Books," talking about, it was this big kind of revelation. And I think it also makes sense to talk to our kids. I mean, I looked at that and I thought, my kids read books in high school, kind of chapter by chapter with guidance from the teacher. And I have one kid who loves to read, but I have a kid who probably won't have read a book independently by the time they go to college, because they're doing a lot of this, read this chapter, then we'll discuss it tomorrow. And then suddenly you get to college and it's like, read these 4 books by Tuesday and without any guidance. So is it helpful then to start talking about those expectations, to start saying, like, in the summer, we're going to read full books? And I mean, it seems to me that we're not the only ones talking about the fact that high school and college seem to have gotten very different, and we're not really helping people bridge that gap.
Yeah, no, I agree. And some of it is just even the syllabus. The student doesn't know how to read the syllabus, and there is and every professor has a different style. So it's not like it's the same template at, the University of Chicago. All professors have the same template. It's very, very different. So, the kid has to learn that discomfort of like, okay, I need to read the syllabus to figure out what's in there. And then, one of my clients, though, that has this giant list of reading, in each day there's a list of reading, and the reading list is on the side in a different portal. None of it it's not in alphabetical order, and it's not in order of the classes. So it's not like October 10th's reading all grouped together. It's this random list. So this kid has got to search like 300 articles for the ones that he has to read. That's very uncomfortable. That takes a lot of persistence. That takes, task initiation, task avoidance can come in there. So it's a lot of that, like, this is what I'm responsible for. How am I going to get through it? So, for some of this, and there was another article and I don't know if it was the same article, Margaret, or another one that I just read about the reading. There's also learning how to read, like how to speed read.
Mm.
because you're not necessarily expected to read every single word.
Mm-hmm.
There's a way that you can get through volumes of reading faster. Now with AI, actually, one of my students, as an extra addition to her reading, she's found an app where she takes her reading and loads it into this, and it turns it into a conversation. It's like a podcast.
Hmm.
It is amazing. It's like a 8-page or 15. I tried it. It's like 15-page PDF. Turned it into a conversation with two people that lasted about 8 minutes, and it pulled
Wow.
out all the information. And that was brilliant. It's not replacing the reading, but it's providing another method of using her study, her senses from reading and then listening. So, it's being creative. It's getting curious. When something is hard, you have to stop and say, well, how can I make this easier?
Right.
And that's bringing in the skill for the kid, even as early as 4th grade. If this homework is hard, what can we do to make this easier? Let's have a conversation about this.
I had a college boyfriend who, I never forgot this. He said that he thought the most important thing that you learned in college was how to do well in college. And I've thought about that ever since, that really this stuff you do learn. You learn to drive by driving, not by reading about driving, not by your parents getting you ready to drive,
Right.
but by driving. And you're with them in the front seat so they don't crash into a tree. But you do, they're gonna jam the brakes a little bit first. And my kids' college launches were not without bumps, but they're not supposed to be, right? That's why they went, to figure this
Right.
stuff out. And so it's okay if you don't get this all perfectly right before they go.
Exactly. Exactly. It's all trial and error, experimenting, pivoting, so that if something isn't going the way you want it to, and the thing is, there's this kind of trend now where, a lot of young adults, they want their experiences to only be happy. Like everything has to be perfect.
Good vibes
And
only.
that's really hard because nothing is 100%
No.
perfect and happy. And sometimes it's that challenge of something hard that brings the happiness later.
Mm.
I mean, something even as simple as gardening, it's hard to be in your yard and digging and planting and all of that hard work. You get very dirty and your back hurts. But then there's joy and happiness when you see the results of these beautiful flowers or vegetables that grow. Well, the same thing with college or schoolwork or friends. When it's hard, think about anybody who's in sports or an actor or a singer or, it's hard, but you're pushing into it and you're trying and then you do it. And there's that, wow, I did it. We got to let our kids experience that. And if we smooth the way too much, then they don't get to experience the joy of having reached, achieved that hard thing.
I feel like this was such a useful conversation. It's like changing the paradigm from college preparedness, like get these 9 tutors and make sure they're getting A's, to college preparedness of like, let them order at a restaurant, let them experience failure. Like college prep, I think, has gotten very mislabeled in terms of what it looks like. And it really is, I think you said it really well, self-awareness, and then the ability to advocate for yourself. Those are the skills you're working on to get ready for college, more than have you read these 900 books.
Right.
And you'll be ready to make mistakes in college if you have those skills.
Exactly. Knowing what your triggers are. I mean, just real quick, think about I know kids, like when they're 5 years old, there are certain kids that you'd had to get them to the birthday party first because they would have a meltdown if they arrived towards the, as one of the last kids of arriving. So you knew your kids' triggers. Well, triggers change as we mature. So help your kids know what their triggers are, but also how to work with them and how to transition. Like, you're going to be triggered when we have to go into the mall or when we have to do this or we have to do that. So how can we prepare for that and build in some transitions so that you can enter that next thing? Going to an airport could be triggering for somebody, or a grocery store, or a library, or a party. And helping your kids say, yeah, that is going to be a problem for me. What am I going to do about it? How can I plan for it? And that starts as early as 5, because we know, one of my kids can't stand ketchup. Okay. So like,
Agree. I love this kid. I am exactly the same. I hate
That's
it.
a correct child.
Correct
so
child.
in preschool, he did not sit at the table with his friends on the days that there was ketchup, because ketchup was yucky for him. And he was okay with that. He knew that about himself and he owned it. Let's help our kids own what they need at the earliest of ages.
We've been talking to Emily Rubin Persons. Emily, this was such a helpful conversation. I am sure many listeners will want to find out more about you and your work. So where can they go find that?
Skip Coaching. My business name is Skip Coaching. Skip means to move forward in leaps and bounds.
Oh.
And that's what I do with my clients. I help them move forward. So
Awesome.
skipcoaching.com. If you need help with coaching or how to advocate with the schools, whatever, I'm always open for a conversation.
Fantastic. We will link to there. Emily, thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Emily.